Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. We're starting about 10:15 because the board was in executive session and just ended, so we apologize for the delay. We are going to end at 11:30 because Dr. Shields, as most of you will know, is now in two roles. He's an assistant superintendent and he's also the interim superintendent, the acting superintendent right now, so a lot on his plate. So without further ado, just introduce people around the table, my committee members, Rachel Roth, who is from our district council, Dr. Stephanie Allen from PPS, and Javi. So let's start off. We have the minutes for reference from the November meeting and a personnel update.
Yeah, so those minutes are for reference and they are up for approval at the next board meeting on the 17th. As a personnel update, I think what's of note to this committee is that we have a December 1st deadline for the Port Washington Teachers Association, which is triggers an incentive for them to give us early notice if they're choosing to retire. And we have 11 teachers retiring effective in June. So you will see them on the board agenda at the next board meeting for approval. And we will then start recruiting for them shortly after the new year to try and make sure we have full access to the best applicant pool that we can. So if you're curious, is that a big number, is that a small number? We've been sort of running around that number fairly consistently, about 10 to 12 is, so this falls right in that range.
Okay, and the board has been apprised of those individuals, but we will not be public with it until it's approved on the December agenda.
Correct, yes, thank you for saying that. And the benefit to the district on that is that we get to know earlier on, so that helps us from a budget standpoint. We can budget for maybe some less senior teachers coming in, and we can also begin the recruiting process to replace them earlier on. So that's the benefit to us. All right. So the next phase of the agenda is really trying to revisit some of the policies that there's been some questions raised about. I want to thank everyone for the work they've done in preparation for today. You have there, just as a reference material, Dr. Allen's chart for the 4321 series. That's just there for you if you find it helpful. 1.4 on the agenda is the use of credit cards. This was up for adoption on our board agenda. The question was raised about the dollar amount, and the dollar amount on that policy has been revised by Ms. Manuel for us. So I think that answers the question of the board. And if it's okay with the board, we'd put it back up for approval with those modified numbers.
Yes, and as I remember, I don't have a copy of it here, but as I remember, it was modified, the numbers were modified down. So from, I think it was 20,000 to 8,000, and the aggregate also was modified down by Dr. Manuel, not by the board.
Down to 30, yes. So yeah, it was modified down to 8, and then on an aggregate it was modified down to 30.
Okay, so we'll put this on at December for adoption.
All right, good, thank you. So then we come back to policy 4321. That's a policy that we discussed at our last meeting. And there was a question raised about the age. So Dr. Allen and Ms. Roth, if you want to give us where you think we are on that issue right now. So that was put up for first read. The question was raised about how long do we serve students in the district. And it's based on age within a regulation, so yeah.
Yeah, so that is what's written here is kind of where we are and where we've landed, is that until the day before they turn 22 is what the guidance has been. It hasn't been adopted into regulation just yet, so we've gotten opinions of council from the state. And obviously previously I've spoken with Howard about this. So this matches what our current practice would be.
And Ms. Alvarez, you had a comment about that.
I have since been updated and I'm okay. I
You're
think
okay with it?
we're good with this.
Okay.
The only new comment would be is the one that I got printed and picked up in the packet yesterday doesn't actually word what we discussed in the last meeting, up until the day before their 22nd birthday. It just says until their
Until the
22nd.
yeah, right.
So that's the only
Yeah,
thing,
this
is
is
that
not,
this doesn't have the update,
so it would be, yeah, until the day before.
right? Because
Yes.
it was just the clarity. So that was
Yes.
my only,
And also on page 2, under number 1, the second sentence, the plan will be available for public inspection. I think there was language defective in the PPS office and for review by the
Yes, there
commissioner,
was some
yes.
changes with
Because I
that, too.
asked where will it be made for public inspection. And eventually it may be on the website, but
Yes.
right now it's not. So this is not the most current version.
correct, right? That's what I was just gonna say, okay.
Yes, but we've now discussed, it should be on the current version. The most important language, though, is in that one paragraph. Every eligible student with a disability will be entitled to special education and related services until the day before their 22nd birthday.
Right.
Or, yeah, okay? So we put this back on for adoption.
Back on for adoption, very good, thank you.
And just a friendly reminder, I will not be at the December board meeting, so.
What?
Yes. You'll miss me, I know. So, somebody can step in. Okay,
The next 3 items on the agenda, we'll put on for first read at the board level. And one of our trustees had a question on all 3 of them. So I just wanted to make sure that those questions were addressed.
yes, you should.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So for the alternative formats, that's the first one, 4321.6, and I believe, but it's alternative formats is the policy. I'm gonna table my question for the future board development potentially and for full board discussion, because my question is relative to a lot of our policies and not just specific to this policy. So my question that I wanted to discuss, and then after some thought, and I'll explain what the question is, I realized that it could be applying to a lot and that it's just like a further discussion. But on this, there's all these clauses on how we get the alternative methods, how we're gonna see if it's the right one, the timeline, the purchase order, all of that. There is no final number 9 clause about a review of the effectiveness of the alternative method chosen. And I debated saying, okay, is that something in the district plan? Is that gonna be something that is just done in practice? There doesn't need to be a policy. And I thought, okay, who is given the review? Would that be something that PPS gives to the superintendent? Is the superintendent giving it to the board for review? But my overall question is, we have all these policies, not just relative to special ed, that some of them will list that the board will be given an update or a review of it. Or it just says that there is a review of it, but I wanted to maybe bring it into board development, a full board discussion of what it is that the board is actually being updated on an annual basis, not listing an annual basis. For example, one of the ones that we're gonna be talking about later is the disproportionality document. So that one says, when the board becomes aware of a disproportionality in whatever special ed, but when does the board know if there's a disproportionality, if there's no review of an annual review of some sort? So long story short, I am gonna table my specific one for alternative formats and just try to bring it to the full board or to maybe a future policy meeting of which policies count, which ones really are necessary that the board get a review of. The SEC, the one we just did for that one, right? So the climate one, I think it said something about a review, but then there's some of the special eds one that doesn't say anything about a review for it. So, and then I was speaking with Dr. Allen about like part 200, saying what is the role of the board and which ones do we really need? So it's very complicated, and I know part 200 isn't complicated and my statement's complicated, but the reason I'm tabling is because I wanna just come back to the policy with just here's what I've seen on certain policies and get a sense of, like, what do you guys feel of, like, even, I said it last board meeting, chronic absenteeism and just our attendance policy. I have yet to see a report on attendance policy. I know we're gonna get it updated, it's scheduled, but just knowing what is the role of a board and at what point do we get these updates and
So
reviews?
are you asking, do we have like a list of what we see annually? Is that?
So in a nutshell, yes, and also, what does the board feel that it should be, and what does administration feel that is, these are the ones that make sense to give it? So these policies should be updated to reflect that. So when I thought about the alternative format, I was like, well, I'm gonna ask if it's appropriate for an annual review, but we haven't spoken as a board to see if that's an appropriate fit there. And administration, I didn't wanna throw that out, because then I'm like, if I'm gonna ask it for it there, why am I not asking for it in 5 other policies? If that makes sense.
However, if you have a concern before we adopt this policy and then possibly have to go back to it to revise it, my thinking procedurally would be raise this to the full board in December and say, is this something we want to, in fact, and we can put it in the agenda, under committee reports, is this something we want to have an annual review of?
So another
Rather than
piece of
lose
that
it.
is that the alternative format is really driven by an
Students.
annual review of students' IEP, correct? So that's,
So it wouldn't be needed in this one per se?
I don't
Yeah.
see it being in the same lane
Yeah.
as something like looking at absenteeism or something
Yeah.
like that.
And
Reports are different than something like this,
Yeah.
I think.
And I think learning more about alternative formats also is like, okay, technology changes, right? So that's also like, that's just something, again, in the district plan, that it just might be in there. That's why for my one question for this, my long-winded answer is, I'm gonna table my question.
Okay.
But for this one, I am set with
You're
as
okay.
adopted, but as a side note, maybe next year, this might be one that where I'm like, oh, wait, can we bring this one back? Just as a, it just, okay. Based on the full board consensus, also based on the administration on what they feel on
Okay.
certain policies.
So we'll put this on for adoption in December.
Thank you.
And it is in the district plan, there's like 5 pages.
Okay, there you go.
So should we move on to 4321.7?
Yes, we shall.
Okay, so, I'll ask I have further understood the difference between the district-wide assessments. I know there was a lot of discussion, recently in the notes, of like the differences between diagnostics versus achievement with testing. But my original question, if Dr. Allen, you can give the explanation, but my original question for this one, and my confusion on this one was, the district-wide assessment, the wording in this policy felt that it was discussing all assessments done in the district for any student. And this, in my mind, would include our universal screener, and having accommodations. However, we know that recently at curriculum, that the universal screener given in the district does not give accommodations. So for me, I just wanted clarity on why we approve this one as it is, or change any sort of language you think might be needed to just kind of differentiate between those
Assessments.
assessments. Yeah.
Well, it's really achievement assessments. It's, to your point, these are not diagnostics we're talking about.
Oh, I didn't know the difference between
Right.
this week of diagnostics and achievement.
Right, so it's actually probably poorly worded or not clear.
So let's fix that.
I think I had made a suggestion
I
for
saw
some
it, yeah.
Yeah,
language for that, but I don't see it in.
Yeah,
It's
I-
not on
I-
this.
You know,
Do you
okay.
want to see it? Because I printed out at home, I printed out the ones with comments on it.
I was
Does that
trying to
help?
pull it up.
Right.
It's tiny.
Yeah, so what we would want to include in there is what's actually on the IEP, so that this says that test accommodations are for the administration of district-wide assessments of student achievement and consistent with department policy, and state assessments of student achievement that are needed by the student to participate in the assessment.
Is that the language you would like to see?
Yes.
Can you circle that and then draw a little arrow as to where you think it should go,
Okay.
roughly, and then?
For,
I'll pull it up on here and I'll make it.
And I read that language and I'm fine with that language. Can you, listen, I can bring it up curriculum or just because you're here now, but can you please explain why one would get accommodations and why one wouldn't get accommodations? I know that now we've made the language to clarify between the two, but as far as PPS, as far as special education, why does one get an accommodation and one not get an accommodation?
So when you're looking at an achievement measure, we want to see what the student has achieved. What have you learned? And the test accommodation levels, that's the phrase, levels the playing field so that the student can appropriately demonstrate what they have learned and are not limited by their disability. On a diagnostic test, we're now looking at what are your skills? Where are your skills? What are the skills that you are lacking in? We're diagnosing that problem so that we can hone in on that. If we give an accommodation on a diagnostic, we're muddying that up and we're not really seeing what the skill is that we need to be addressing. So in something with the iReady in particular, you get the MyPath, which is very specific, and it's based on that student's individual need, and that's what we want to be doing.
And it may also taint the accommodation.
Correct, exactly, right. And for me, further conversation at CSE, it gives us more understanding of an accommodation, why a student would need it. On an achievement measure, here we are, this makes sense. Diagnostic, here's where we are, and it gives the evidence for certain accommodations.
And to clarify, some physical disabilities on the diagnostic is still getting that accommodation.
Correct.
But others, disabilities, not because they are less than, but just because of the reasoning and the outcome is why they would not be needed.
Right. Right.
So that wasn't clarified to me at curriculum, and that's why I pulled this one to just better understand why we would approve a policy that was contradictory of what we did in practice, but with the update, I'm great with this one.
That's what I wanted to
Yes.
ask.
So did you change the title to make it clearer? Because
I
ours
think
doesn't
so.
reflect that.
I think, yes, district-wide of a disability.
I'm trying to pull up the edited.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it in here, because
The copy that Dr. Allen has in front of her has all the notes and changes on it. So if it's not reflected in the title there, then it wasn't changed.
it just said, the title is still district-wide and state assessments, and statewide assessments of students with disabilities.
What would you rather it be seen?
Well, I think it would be clearer for the community and/or staff that it's really not assessments, it's
Achievement measures.
right. Or we leave assessments and put something in parentheses that explains what that means, because sometimes people think of assessments as the statewide,
Like me.
ELA math,
Right.
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Which is fine, but it's not some people could see that and think of it as the diagnostics, which is
Right.
the problem.
We can
Correct.
drop a footnote and say specifically what it does and doesn't include.
I'm good
Yeah.
with whatever. I will say that
I can't.
in my more naive self, I was like, this is for everything. So for
That's
me,
my point,
that would
that's
be
my point.
clarified, but if, with the update of the wording that you're gonna put in there, I think that would give me clarity. But if there's a footnote, by all means, to
Footnote
dig,
makes sense.
yeah, for the differences.
Okay.
And maybe the footnote is the language that that could be
okay.
the footnote for the purpose of clarification.
Okay, Rachel, Ms. Roth, anything you can think of that would help to clarify it? Footnote, okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I think that does a nice job of clarifying what the policy is addressing.
Okay, so we've landed where this information that's in comment number 3, which I will add, now becomes a footnote after assessments, after the word assessments, to clarify what assessments is. Okay. And there was also a change just a small change, that Ms. Roth added, on page 2, added number 5 and number 6. We'll go with that? Okay, put this back on for adoption in December,
Very good, thank
the
you.
change. Okay,
And then 4321.11, a new policy as well.
for disproportionality. My question was the similar one from before is, maybe more so on this one, of how is the board given, should the board be given annual reporting of some sort, or should the board be, should the superintendent have an annual reporting of some sort? But the wording on this says, nonetheless, upon learning of significant, paragraph 2, nonetheless, upon learning of significant disproportionality in the suspension, so on, the board will immediately review the district's policy and so on. In practice, there is no way that this board would all of a sudden be checking if there's disproportionality within the district. And for me, I understood what you said before, of like, if I have an issue with it, I should raise it now instead of it getting adopted, but we could always pull a policy for future year for review. So for sake of adopting policies, especially this new one, and I want this to be in the district, I'm okay with it as is. I think this will be definitely one of the ones that I bring up for discussion as far as some of the policies of how are we getting a report? And at what point, and is a report appropriate, and what PPS thinks and what the administration as a whole thinks for some sort of reporting, and that it's not necessarily like after the fact, right? Like if we're close to a threshold, because I was gonna ask about thresholds, because disproportionality for me, as a community member prior, I was like, what does that even mean? So looking at New York State's thresholds, it's all different for different reasons. So I was like, okay, that becomes too complicated to list the threshold, and it's unique to Port Washington. So for me, that would be my only ask of this is how is the board going to be updated? And maybe that's a discussion now. I don't know if there's, this was the NISBA one, or is this, I think, NISBA directly? You know, is there
a mechanism for, because I was wondering that myself, and I don't know if disproportionately is determined by an outside audit or internally. I don't know if there's an internal mechanism to review disproportionality, so I'll ask.
It's when our state data is all sent up, we get a report back from New York State that tells us, based on what we've sent and shared, you're either disproportionate or you're not. And they break it into all the subgroups and the ethnic and racial categories, things like that.
And then you report that to the board.
Correct.
Which has been done in the past.
Oh, so I haven't, okay, so technically in practice, it is given to the board at some point, if there's an issue.
Yeah.
Correct, correct. Because
Okay.
that, yes, it triggers another audit and a corrective action plan, so when it happened last year, I did put a memo to the board in the packet about it.
So then I'm wondering if in this policy, we can include language that says, so in other words, this language is presuming, is requiring the board to review policies upon a finding of disproportionality. Do we want to say somewhere in here, upon learning of a significant, I'm in now in the second paragraph, first sentence, upon learning of a significant disproportionality in the suspension, identification, upon learning from state education?
Yeah, see, that's where, that would help, because for that right reason that you just explained, when you learn of it to give to us, that should be listed, right? Because I think it's assumed then that, well, I'll ask this. Are you aware of a disproportionality before state ed sends it to you?
Because I've been monitoring trends, yes, but that's because of the work I've been doing as related to other issues. So I try to mitigate some of those to prevent it from triggering the audit. Does that make sense?
Yep, and I don't, I think that is a practice that you do
right.
as in your position, and I'm grateful for that. So I think that at minimum, to start, we should list the state, right? When the state informs you, I think in fairness, before the board starts reviewing 1,000 policies, that in fairness, if we list it when the state sends it to the district, that would be the appropriate
That's the
language.
trigger.
I find that that might be the appropriate language, then that these 5 other steps that are listed, might be, instead of just saying nonetheless upon learning when?
Right. So would this be pursuant to a state ed audit? Or is it, what is the triggering event that, upon which you will learn this?
Every year, we have to submit our data for Beds Day. So everything comes off of Beds Day. So it's not really an audit, it's just an annual report that every single district does when they report our student data to
And
the
if
state.
there's disproportionality in a certain
Then-
subgroup, then they inform
And it
us.
comes back.
Right,
So then upon learning from state ed then, is just simply,
yeah.
Like if there's a sentence you'd be comfortable with,
Yeah.
Yeah,
put
I
in
think
there.
state ed is fine, yeah.
I would
That is who,
list just, right, state education department, just so everyone's clear.
Of what
what's-
that
what that
terminology.
means.
Okay.
I know we all know what state ed means, but
Right.
I would write it out in
I
full.
will, yes, I will do that, okay.
And-
Because what you may think is disproportionality may not trigger it from state ed, but state ed is definitely a defining
correct,
trigger.
correct.
Because do their thresholds get updated and changed? So like I was trying to read it and just like the 2.5, I just remember that one. Like
Yes.
2.5, because it's different on what was listed also, like the classification versus suspension versus so does that annually change for them? Do they say like, okay, 2.5 this year is okay, but next year it's 2? Does that ever change or is that not?
It
It's like
changes.
2.5 is like always forever.
It's always usually around that number, but it does and can change depending upon the student population
Within the district.
within the
Yeah,
district.
but the
yes.
number threshold that New York State goes by, that
No,
doesn't
that I don't
change.
change.
Okay.
Okay,
Yep.
so I'm for adoption in December, let's put it back, okay, with the revisions. Good,
So 1.9 on the agenda is graduation ceremonies. This is a new policy for us. That I know has had some significant work done to it. We started with the NYSBA sample and have been editing that document. And as was clarified by the people who are working on it, this is about high school graduation, not to be confused with any moving up ceremony at any of our other schools.
which is why high school is now in the title.
Yes.
And we have one high school, so it's now ceremony. Because when I said ceremonies, I thought, okay, well, are we talking about preschool? Like, what are we talking? Okay, good, so that's clarified. And then, generally, there's just been some revision, but the more important thing, I think, is the recommended paragraph, the recommended optional paragraph. There were 2. And Dr. Allen, you had suggested the first paragraph,
Yes.
the recommended paragraph. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. And then, was there anything, other than just me doing my cross-referencing and making sure we have all these policies that are listed here, which hopefully by the end of this session, we'll have many of them, any other questions about this policy? Can it be put on for a first read?
So I have one clarifying question.
Okay.
And I debated on my question because this kind of ties into the main one, the 4321. For graduation, if the student is, I'm trying to give the exact example. So if the student ends up choosing the graduation of their 22nd birthday, so they walk in June with the group, they did not receive anything, or they received it on their 22nd that year. And I know I'm making it more complicated, but I just like clarity so that there's no complication and I don't kick myself in the foot for future that I didn't ask it out. So let's just assume, because we have agreed as a policy committee to bring for the full board the adoption of until their 22nd birthday, day before. What transpires on graduation week that a student needs to participate in to be part of a ceremony? So a student, if they are walking that day, they just show up that day, or is there a few things leading up to that day?
The rehearsal.
And how many?
One?
I think it's 1.
Okay, so is it safe to say that a student who turned 22 in October, who's gonna be allowed to graduate in June, that they would be welcomed on campus for all activities pertaining to that ceremony. However, again, being the potentially being, if you're in the district until 22nd birthday, they said this at a board meeting, you are potentially one of our more vulnerable students or one of our students who receive multiple services and accommodations. So is there potential that we are looking at a student who may need an aid? And if they're on their 20s, they've already finished on financials of the district on October, who is paying for the aid in the June ceremony and the rehearsal?
So in situations like that, that we have had, it's usually one of our staff members that volunteers to participate.
It's a volunteer position.
Right. Not, so, you know, the psychologist did one year, she walked with the student, she was with the student. A couple of years ago, it was one of the teachers, you know, that know they have the relationship, so we don't want it to be somebody that,
I love that.
right, that they just don't know, but somebody they have a relationship with, and they sit with them, and,
That's beautiful.
yeah, it works out great.
That was a great answer. I don't have to argue right now.
No.
Thank you.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
so that was my only clarifying with
Okay.
the ceremonies and, okay, thank you.
Okay, so then the only modification that wasn't on here was in the last paragraph on the first page to clarify, the program is until the day before their 22nd birthday. Okay, first read in December. Great. Oh, if we can get it on for a first, we can, yeah, because I know it's, we can, in a week or so, 2 weeks, good, okay.
All right.
All right.
So that was graduation ceremony, so item 1.10 is programs and services for potentially placed non-public school students with disabilities. It's a new policy, it's not a required one, but a trustee suggested that we still have it.
Yes. I thought it was important, because we, in the event, we do reference it in other policies, and in the event that we do have non-public school students, I think it's important to have policy. No gray area, it's very clear. Does anybody have any questions? So this was the NISPA sample, it was reviewed behind the scenes to try to bring it up to speed here. Does anybody, and everybody at this table has had access to it, I should say. Actually, everybody at this table has had access to all of the 4321 series, legal counsel, PPS, et cetera. So, any questions on this policy? None.
Oh, shocker, I know.
Okay, the only question I
We did a good
had-
job.
Yeah, it's straightforward and that's good. The only question I have is on page 2, under provision of services, there was a note that the parents of non-public school students needed to make the request to the school district / Board of Education. Somewhere in there, Dr. Allen, you made a comment that it eventually gets to PPS, and I just wasn't sure whether this sentence can stay the way it is, or we need to add PPS in here, because I know, Ms. Roth, you said that it must go to the board first. It eventually gets to PPS, but legally it must go to the board first. Do I understand that correctly?
Technically, the law is the request goes to the Board of Education of the district of location. If a district has a practice of filtering it through other parties first or second, that's a district practice, but by law, it's supposed to go before the boards for their, because ultimately, you know, it's their approval.
So it's essentially what we get monthly, where we get the listing of, we're approving all of the services that you're, or
Right, it would be
formerly
part of,
CSE.
yes, yes.
It's
So,
still,
what we
that's
call
the
board's
formal
trust,
process.
yes.
Yes.
So PPS, or, you know, they get those notifications because they're the ones that
From
had
the
to convene the meeting and
Mhm.
decide the services and go through that whole process, but ultimately, the board is formally approving all of those services.
So as currently written, is this okay? Because this is now going to direct parents / guardians. Somewhere in here, we have a definition that parents means an umbrella, but it's not in this particular policy. As this sentence as written will direct parents / guardians of non-public school students to write to the board. Is that what we want, or do we?
So, in my opinion, I would leave that the way it is, because for you, you're not just getting students who might be seeking services from you as the district of location. You might have people that live in district whose child's in a district somewhere else, who maybe are referencing your policy, and they, oh, yeah, I don't contact my board for services, I have to contact the board of the district where my child's school is located.
Right.
So you're directing them too. So I think that the way it's worded makes it more clear, but
Because I don't know that the board is actually getting, I don't remember seeing those requests directly from parents to the board. They're coming through your
They're coming
office.
through my office.
So that's why I'm asking, we would then be changing the practice.
But
I mean, like, it's
tech-
eventually coming to the board, but my sense is it's first going to PPS.
But if a parent chose to send it to PPS first, PPS has an obligation to eventually tell the board.
Right.
But if a parent sent it to us, they're doing what they're legally allowed to do, and we can just forward it. So technically, I understand the justification because the wording is the district board of education of the district of location, because that would be weird to say to the PPS department of the district of location. That's like,
It's also, I think, important because then it's acknowledged on that important due date of June 1st. If it winds up in PPS and then it doesn't get to us by June 1st, then there's gonna be a problem for that family.
So, but what, I guess what I'm hung up on is the fact that to my knowledge, these requests are not coming directly to the board from the household. In my brain, they've always come through PPS.
Can we
And
add
I guess,
through
so I
PPS?
guess the parents seem to be, and I don't know how that happens. What I'm saying is, I'm fine with the language as is, but the practice seems to be different. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I've never seen any of those letters.
but now they
It's the
will.
practice
Right,
piece of
but-
it. We send them, we solicit from them. So we have a letter, it's called our June 1st letter, that we send out in April, beginning of May, to families of students that attend private schools. And they send it back to my office.
And so there's the piece.
Right.
So I'm asking you as attorney, is that okay? Or must it?
Yes, the practice is fine. My concern with you not having Board of Education in there is if you were to get that notification, if for whatever reason it didn't go through PPS,
It has to
you
count.
are still on the hook for that. If it's received by anyone in the district by June 1st, it needs to be forwarded to the proper parties. But very often, parents will just go to state ed, right? They'll go to the state ed's website, and it'll say Board of Education of District of Location. So if they write a letter to the board directly and you receive it, it still counts.
Right.
So that's why I think that language is important to leave in there. I think it's fine to add additional language, but I think Board of Education needs to remain.
Because
Understood.
if they sent it to the board, if we change the policy and they sent it to the board on the correct date, and we as a board are like, oh, you didn't follow our policy though, we're in violation.
No, I understand. I'm just talking about this versus practice.
Correct.
That's where I'm
Right,
having a disconnect.
Right.
So is the practice is okay?
Yes.
That's what I want to make sure of. And this language is legally required. So I just want to make sure that, because to me, there's a conflict between the practice and the language.
But I think there's also a safety net for us, that if it does come to the board on June 1st, we know that the board's going to send that to the superintendent, and the superintendent's gonna send that to the PPS office.
Hopefully, we know that.
And
We'll let her
they're
know.
not.
Because that's part of our practice too,
Right.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that we're good. That was my only concern. So this language as is. Okay, first read. You good with that?
all right.
Okay.
Oh, we love this one. It always comes back. This is your favorite.
1.11 on the agenda is a policy that this committee
Not fun enough.
has spent a significant amount of time writing initially and now revising.
So, Ms. Roth, you reviewed this, I had asked you, please make sure it's legally sufficient, you said it's fine.
Yes,
You would just add the regulation,
correct.
and the exhibit. So,
Definitions.
the regulation, yes, is filled with stuff that to me almost seems repetitive of what's in the policy. So, I guess I'm either repetitive of what's in the policy, or adds to things that maybe should be in the policy, and I am not competent to answer that question. So, because it seems to me like there's a lot more than definition, there's what to do with stuff. So for example, under use of timeout, after timeout is defined, it then says timeout may only be used in situations that pose an immediate concern, but we kind of have that in our policy. We don't have that exact language. So it's actually, the language in our policy doesn't exactly mirror the language that's in the regulation that isn't exactly definition. So is there a way to synthesize, do you understand, do you follow?
I do. So I've actually seen this both ways. I've seen districts have a policy and a regulation, and then I've seen districts just all combine it into a policy, just as long as all the information is there. So that's why your policy by itself is fine the way it is, even though, again, I wouldn't add the definitions. But I didn't want to start toying with that without reviewing the regulation first.
Yes.
Because otherwise, there's no plan.
So for example, in our policy, under precipitating factors and time limitations, where it says timeout and physical restraint will be used for the least amount of time, generally only until blah, 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 blah. And in the regulation, it's much more emphatic language. Timeout may only be used in situations, or may be used only in situations that pose an immediate concern for the physical safety of the student or others. Staff must return students. So to me, that language that's in the regulation is much better suited to what's in our policy, and to replace that last line under precipitating factors and time limitations. It just seems to me there's redundancy. There's stuff to me that's in the regulation that should be in the policy. This was just one paragraph that I saw that I said, this is much better worded. The language in the regulation is much better worded than the language we have in our policy. And then I just said, I'm gonna stop, because I'm neither legally nor wheelhouse competent to then go through everything and say, really what should be in policy, really what should be in regulation. And so I'm really looking to the two of you to synthesize this like massive amount of regulation.
So by its nature, this one's gonna be a little repetitive between the policy and the regulation. Does the committee prefer combining it into one? Or do we want a policy and a regulation? Because that's going to make a difference in how we go about reviewing it.
Well, part of my problem is that what's in the regulation, like the paragraph I just read, is language we have in our policy, but the language in our policy is wishy-washy, and the language in the regulation is.
You did, remember, you significantly revised that policy, so,
But not to
again,
the
I
ex-
don't,
But not to that extent. In other words, in the regulation, it says timeout may only be used in situations. We would, I know this committee would have wanted to have had the benefit of that language to restrict the time when timeout could be used. And then staff must return students to the educational program as soon as. I know that would have been something that this committee would have wanted to see. So I guess my question, I know you want to answer. I
Not
think
answer,
there's a
opinion.
benefit to have regulation as well as policy, but not when the language in the regulation conflicts with the language in the policy, or muddies the language in the policy. That's my problem.
So my opinion on this specific policy, I have an opinion on it for two reasons. One, I happened to be at the conference that explained about how certain policies were not clear enough, and timeouts the use of timeouts is very, very difficult situation, right? That is just a difficult situation in the moment for staff to handle, for a parent to understand after the fact, before the fact, because you are supposed to know about it before the fact of like what we agree upon. But for me, the whole reasoning of adding, and what I felt from like what you said, the last one of why having it, the whole point of having the two, I would like two, of just clear as day, this is the regulation, these are the definitions, so that I don't have to kind of cryptically understand the wording and the sense of what the committee wanted to have a feeling on use of timeouts, but clear as day. This was what it was used for, this is why it was used for, this is the amount of time, this is what it cannot be used for. Also because for someone who's dealt with this, I would like clear definitions, as clear as possible. So that's why I personally, because you asked about, I think you asked if we're talking about one policy or two, a regulation and a policy, I would prefer two. My only thing then is if we did have two, I understand where you're coming from with like, now it's,
I just want to clarify, I don't think one is muddying the other,
yeah.
but the language in the regulation is much stronger than the language in the policy, the way it's currently worded. That is a significant difference. So again, that would be something that I would look for your guidance in reviewing, because I know that there's been a lot of revision on this policy, so I don't want to undo a lot of those discussions.
When we talked about revisions, we were changing the tone and the philosophy, but not the law. We never.
Right. Well, that's why like I said, I want to clarify that I don't think this is muddying anything. I think it's just a difference in the tone.
Well, one of them, the one in the regulation, and this, just in this particular paragraph, and I just stopped, is very specific. It says the only time that timeout may be used is when. And it doesn't say that in the policy, and I think it should be very clear in the policy, since it's about timeout, that this is the only time it can be used, and that there is a mandatory returning of students to their educational program when such thing has happened. The last sentence in the policy doesn't, to me, doesn't communicate that emphasis. And that emphasis to me is a philosophy.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying there are things in the regulation, I think, that don't belong in the regulation, but belong in the policy. And I just don't know, outside of that paragraph, I just don't
Okay.
know which is which. Definitions definitely in the regulation. Procedures definitely in the regulation, but the philosophy is the only, like, that to me was the thing that just jumped out at me and said, this is the line. I read this before, but this is, it's more in line with our philosophy. Here's the only time it can be used, and here's when it must stop, kind of thing.
Can you just write as per regulation? No, really, like generally, I understand you worked on it, but like that is the major issue right now, what it feels like is the fact that your paragraph that you guys worked on last year, where it says journaling timeout, physical restraints will be used when students, blah, blah, blah. I think that paragraph should be the reworded paragraph.
Yes,
With whatever wording you would like.
I would just pick up that paragraph from the regulation, remove it from the regulation, and from the word timeout to others, put in the word from timeout to meet expectations from the regulation, bless
Sorry,
you.
do you have district practices in the use of timeout and physical restraint?
Yes, it would be the regulation. We're consistent with what's, if that's what, practically,
Yeah, like
Yes.
in practice.
in practice.
Do you have specific procedures that you follow that in general conform to this, but are specific to Port Washington?
Yes.
Because we'll work on adding that into the regulation, and then we can take some of the language in the regulation and mesh it with the policy, so that hopefully it's less repetitive
Yes,
and gets the point across.
yes, I would
That works for everyone.
appreciate that, because it seems like an awful lot is in regulation. That to me isn't really regulation, it's more policy, so can I ask you to look at that and see what really should go into the policy?
we want that back for the January.
So just to clarify, are we keeping a regulation and a policy?
Yes, I think,
Okay.
well, you and I agree on that. Are you okay with that? Yes. And then there's also an exhibit page, which I would just, yes, but if you were able to do it for January, that would be great. I mean, we already have this policy on the books, which is good. If you're able to do it for January, that would be great. If not, you'll let us know.
So I just have a question on the exhibit. Because I didn't see the regular, I didn't have access to this one, but I see it quickly now. If we're having an exhibit, this is the first time I have an exhibit in any of the policies, so just a general question. This isn't a mandatory document, this is just an example document, right?
Yes.
So if PPS chose to send an email, it doesn't have to be this, saying, just as an update, your child, blah, blah, blah. Or if PPS chose to do a phone call, is that legally allowed? Phone call, email?
I think we have to
think it
notify
has to
them
be
in
in
writing.
So, but
I
an
mean,
email,
you can do a phone call,
Yes.
right,
As well as-
immediately,
Yeah.
yeah,
but it has to be followed up, I believe, in writing.
And there's certain things in the exhibit that are required in the notification,
okay.
right, so.
Yeah, and it does say that the follow-up letter is not required by law, but
Okay.
does demonstrate efforts to comply with the law.
But that's something, right, so, you know, that you have a specific procedure that you follow in those circumstances for notification, we can add that
Okay.
to the regulation, and then if we have to amend that exhibit to look more like what you would send home, we can do that too.
Or if you don't want the exhibit.
Yeah, we could go through that.
I was okay with no exhibit. I was surprised with the exhibit, so that's why I was like, it was a very formal letter that I've never seen, so it just like.
Then, so it could be no exhibit, right? But we'll leave that, yes, okay, so that's.
All right, item 1.12, these are, the next set of the series is our policies that we do have. But I believe what Dr. Allen has done is taken a look at the NISBA sample as compared to our current policy and made suggestions on how to update our current policy.
This is 13, and this, but here it is, yes, okay.
The first one is preschool special education.
Yeah, so this has been revised also with the attorneys and Dr. Allen. Nan, you had a comment where it says the duties described above will be carried out within the time frame. Right there, and so I said, you said it's not very user-friendly. So I didn't know what you meant and if you wanted to have any input on that.
You need to come back to me because I don't remember what I was referring to.
Okay. Sandra, you have any comments on this as written?
My only question is, because there was the edit, so is that because you had asked, or someone had asked, about the reporting? So instead of each preschool, so is it my understanding that instead of the board getting a report on each student, it's just gonna be a report on the program and services, right? That's the edit? It's not like a requirement that we be apprised to every single special ed student, or is that the legal requirement? Okay,
Yeah,
so
anytime we have a CPSE meeting for a preschool student, that's part of the board
the
documentation.
documents, yeah, so that would be my only thing, because I think this was a comment that was put in the Google sheet, but then the edit changed it to be programs and services, not on each student.
So
Which in practice you do, I know.
well, I meant that to be all encompassing, so
Okay.
if there was an issue that the board needs to be apprised of,
Got
you're gonna be apprised of it. If,
Right.
you know, IEPs need to be approved for CPSE, you'll be apprised and approved
So
of.
it encompasses each student.
That was my intention,
Okay.
wording it that way.
Had I not seen the word each student beforehand, I would have assumed that, but because I
Okay.
saw the
Yeah,
beforehand
that was
note.
my intention.
Yeah, so,
So does it need to be clarified?
no, I'm good with this one. I literally, had I not seen the word each student in a discussion of it, I would assume that that's what happens, because we do get the notification on every single student on special education.
Well, is the law that you're required to report to the board as needed regarding the status of each preschool student with a disability? Is that the law? because to me, they say two different things. To me, when I read status of preschool education program, to me, it would be like, everything's great, we have a program.
Well, and services.
Right, and services, but, so is this language clarifying, is it,
The language as written, as revised, is compliant.
okay. Are you okay with that?
I'm totally okay with it, because I would know service is individualized, not like how is speech going for the building, but how is speech going for that specific student. Yes, I'm good with the language.
So should we put in and individualized services, because I wouldn't know that.
I don't think that is gonna make sense there,
Okay,
personally, but
okay,
And in practice, we already get every single.
okay. All right, if the,
I'm ready.
okay,
Okay, so, I was reading that sentence. It seems like it's sending someone to go look for what the timeframes are, so that they can keep track of it, like that June 1st. So this, when I said it doesn't seem user-friendly, either take the sentence out or include more information, because it seems like you're only teasing a little bit of, we'll do what we're supposed to do, but.
so timeframes, in other words, what timeframes are we talking about?
I
And where
thought
do-
that's
and
what
where
you
do
were
we
talking
find
about, but I
those
didn't want to jump the
timeframes?
gun and assuming. Timeframes are always something for me with special education that I'm always like, what is the actual legal timeframe
Right.
So are there a variety of timeframes
in
involved?
special
yes.
education?
That would make this very cumbersome to list them all?
correct.
Can we say as found in
That specific.
education law section, blah, 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 blah?
That would also be cumbersome and still wouldn't provide any clarity, unfortunately.
Do we need the sentence?
That's, I was like,
Do you need the sentence? No, I mean, by law, you have to follow
We got followed
the
anyway.
established timelines in law, and it should be assumed that you are following established timelines set by the regulations. So that sentence to me is really just putting in writing what is already assumed. You know, though what they say about assuming. But yeah, so could you take it out? Yes, the policy would still be fine with or without that sentence. To try to narrow down the timeframes and the sections of the regulation where those timeframes could be found is going to cause more confusion than clarity.
Because I would think that maybe the parents would want to know what the timeframes are.
Well, bear in mind, the district has a practice of sending out notices for a lot of those timelines.
Right.
Parents get a copy of their procedural safeguards every year, which include many of those timelines, and all of their rights as a parent of a student with a disability. And then they also can go to State Ed's website and do their own research and, you know, they have options for how to find that information.
Can we say something like that in the policy then? The timelines associated with this service can be found on the State Ed website, or is there just something, because don't forget, the preschool parents, if it's their first child, are the ones with the least amount of interaction with the district, the least amount of familiarity with the district. If they even know to go to the website
I
to
was gonna
see
say,
the
which
policy.
preschool parent is going
Right?
to the
So-
website for policies?
So I'm just thinking through, before we remove the sentence, which I'm fine with doing, do we, and I know we're legally okay doing it, do we want to say, for more information, see the district website, or is there something else we can put in there to help the preschool parents? Many of whom have never had a child in school, period.
So once back to practice, once they make their way to PPS, they're given the parent guidance of special education and they meet with us and we go over all of these timelines. Like, so that's step one. There are links on the webpage now that we've added, Shannon put them up for us, that goes to everything that, you know, all of this information, the State Ed website, the procedural safeguards. You could refer them to that.
Can I ask, is it gonna be in the service plan? What is the word?
District plan?
District plan, I'm saying service. And the district plan do I have to request the district plan as a parent, or? No, I'm serious though, or is it just electronically on
It's
the
not
website?
electronically, and that goes back
Eventually.
to one of our other policies where I think we said it's available on request in PPS and eventually
The goal is
to get it
The
online.
goal will be that it's eventually on the website.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, and anybody can look at it. Are the timelines
My only thing
in
would be
here?
for all of our special ed policies, there's no such delineation of all the timeframes. So for me, this is very specific to preschool. Some of them will say some date, some amount of times, but when there's some stuff like, even the main one, the 4321 doesn't say asterisk timeframes of 60 days for an evaluation, 30 days. I don't even know the dates off the top of my head. I always have to Google them.
60.
I, 60 is like always, I always remember 60, but like,
15.
yeah, there's always like
Point.
set ones,
Here
but
all day.
there's
have that in 4321. I think we do have a bunch of, if this
on
happens.
all of the
then-
timeframes, because there's a reevaluation dates, there's the acknowledgement that you receive, like, how many are we talking about? There's,
That's why
Yeah.
my advice to you is just leave that sentence the way it is.
because it's not on every single policy, right? Can we acknowledge, are you aware that on, not just Port Washington, on policies,
Yeah, there are dates.
a lot of them, not all of them have every single required timeframe on everything that's special ed.
Correct. That would be, again, that would be onerous.
Okay.
There's some.
There's some.
I've seen 60, I've seen the word
I'm
60
just trying
somewhere.
to address,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
I
100%.
just, this just seemed triggering to me because it made me think like, oh, there's due dates? Like, I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
How do I find them? That sentence,
Right.
I was thinking would be terrifying.
A
to
footnote?
a
But this
person.
could also be meant to protect the district, to say that, or to protect the parent, that the district must follow
Yes.
certain timeframes.
Yes,
So,
yes. But brand new, like you said,
Right.
they're gonna be like, well, what do I have to do? Do I have to do something by a date? I don't know, it just.
but it says the
it's something.
duties above, yeah, so I don't.
So in looking very quickly through 4321, it does give some information on timelines and things like that. So, and that is one of the cross-reference policies here to the main 4321.
Right.
So, I don't.
I don't know how to
We've
resolve it,
discussed it.
it just seems, it just seems like, I don't find that sentence helpful.
Right, because it does lead to more
I
questions.
do understand that,
Yeah.
I do, when you read that on its own. But I think we've heard from council that going in the more specific direction would
Not
put us in an exposed position where we would not maybe capture everything.
Well,
Agreed.
maybe the duties of
So
the
I don't think
district,
we want to do that.
because
I would recommend that you leave that sentence and leave it the way it is.
Okay. First read January, if we can get it there. Okay.
All right, the second policy, again, one we have that's been updated.
Okay, now in this one, so I had one question, but then in the highlighted paragraph where it says, note, the following statement is optional, not required by law. And Dr. Allen, you said the highlighted, this information, this piece is not our practice unless there's something happening in the HR department of which you are unaware. So I guess the question is, the language, obviously not including the note, but the language following note, do we just delete that?
I would say yes, but I don't know if Rachel has a thought on it.
In other words, that language is that PPS, or designate, would prepare an annual report to the board that provides information about the certifications and qualifications of the special education professional personnel, as well as a summary of the professional development opportunities offered. I think we are getting a list of the professional development, which we've really been more heavy on recently. And I know when we hire people, we certainly are given their resumes we're made aware of their certifications and qualifications. So I don't know how to answer this, or to ask the board if the board wants, as a matter of policy, to get a list of the professional development
Can
options.
I ask a question? For gen ed teachers, does the board get this on gen ed teachers? A list of their professional opportunities, blah, 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 blah.
We get that, well, Dr. Feeney gives in the packet, will say, here's what I'm trying to accomplish this year, and so I think we have seen some of the professional development initiatives he's tried to put through.
Which we don't do.
I think that's, the same thing that we just said about like what we get, but that's also relative to special ed teachers. This is like a very specific, saying a report of their qualification certifications, which, again, we already get that when they get hired. When they get
yes.
hired. But the summary of the professional development opportunities offered, we get updates on some of the professional development, but some staff have access to like their own timing of professional development, right? So like, we don't get a summary on the gen ed of that.
Correct,
Yeah.
no.
Can I think this is like a hangover or rollover from something we used to do years ago. We were allowed to do what was called housing teachers, so they didn't necessarily have the certification to teach, let's say, high school math and special ed. But if they had the appropriate professional development and years, there was a big form, you had a certain number of points. This aligns with that practice, which is no longer allowed. Because now you have to be appropriately certified in order to teach the content areas in special education. So I don't think it's necessary.
And what about the summary of the professional development opportunities offered?
Same thing, that's all connected to that process, so I don't think, and if we're doing it for everybody anyway, then it's already a practice, I don't necessarily think it needs to be in there. So,
I'm okay with it not being in there if it's not for, we don't get a full summary of like every single opportunity the gen ed teachers have or the phys ed teachers have, and
Well, you might have special ed teachers too that are getting additional certifications above and beyond what's even required, right?
Yeah.
Like reading certifications and all
and
sorts of other
PBS would be
things.
out of compliance if they didn't give the board that summary,
Right.
which would be like.
So then what I would do is, we would redline this so that the rest of the board can see what we are recommending be deleted. We're not just going to delete this language, we'll redline it. And then when it's on for final, we can delete that. Is that okay? Just so the board, the rest of the board sees our thinking. Okay. The question I had in number 3, seek candidates for teaching positions who are duly certified. Now, I know the answer to this, but I ask in what? So can we be more specific, duly certified in what?
I think the
Gen ed and
list would,
special ed?
yeah, the list would start getting long. So a few years ago, we had all of our teachers that teach in the self-contained programs like Mile had to have both the math, let's say math certification and a special ed certification. So you could go with gen ed and special ed if you wanted to, but
I didn't even know that specific,
Right,
like I just gave a general one, I was
You
like,
know,
oh, is it?
General one, because like, you don't wanna be certified, you don't wanna say bilingual, like, I know I'm being outrageous or certified in physical education.
right.
But just to clarify it a little bit, it's, I know it's under special education personnel, but is there a way to say, when you look for somebody who's duly certified, or who are appropriately duly certified, can we do some kind of modification to that makes it a little more specific to this policy?
I think the challenge with that is that we have special education teachers throughout the district in all different roles. And sometimes they're in a self-contained class where they have to have a subject area knowledge. Sometimes they're in an elementary class, which is a co-teach, where we would prefer them to also have the gen ed elementary certification as well.
Right.
So I think there's so many nuances to what those dual certifications would be.
Is
There's
there-
also the dual certification within special ed. So they've changed it, but it used to be B through 2, so birth through grade 2, grade 1 through 6, 5 through 9. So I look to hire people that are B through 6. I want them to have both, so that could be another dual certification.
Which is an issue with like the changing rate of,
Right.
of the placements, where those, you know,
Right.
Can we say then who are appropriately duly certified, or?
for their
are you-
role,
Are you
for
asking?
their position,
Yeah,
appropriately duly certified
for
For the position.
For the position.
Is that okay?
Right.
Makes sense.
And you're keeping in to the extent possible.
Yes.
yes, because if you
So is
could
there-
Sometimes you can't find.
For the respective,
do better than, no, I'm just joking.
thank you,
You guys better
Zach.
get on that.
Okay. Any other
Try.
questions?
Forgive me, I have my whole paper of notes here that I came for this meeting with, and I have in quotes next to this policy, diverse abilities, but I can't find it anywhere. Did I just write it for the wrong policy?
Diverse abilities of
It,
whom?
There was some place where it didn't talk about students with disabilities, but talked about students with diverse abilities.
I didn't catch that.
And it's a philosophy shift and a mindset change, and I have it next to this policy, and I'm not seeing it, so I'm seeking help.
I don't remember seeing that.
I don't remember seeing that on any policy, so I'm of no
Okay,
help.
so I'm gonna have to go and find it. It's in one of them.
Okay.
I'm only bringing it up now because I have it next to that in my notes for this specific one, and I might just have written it in the wrong spot.
Well, it's not on preschools, because I just did a quick search on preschool.
And I was gonna say, I just looked at the one on accessibility, it's not in there, but I'm wondering if it's in the next one, because that does refer to general education also.
It's not on this one,
Not on
special
that
ed
one?
personnel. I just did a quick search on it.
The point one, is that what you? The
The-
next one is point one? No.
Which is
Point 2, next one.
3 referrals.
I don't wanna derail this.
Okay. Can we put this on for a first
I have a
read?
question, sorry. I have a question on the red.
Yes.
So number 4, the edit was, I like the edit, but I'm being realistic in practice. So the edit, to ensure that every member of the professional staff participates in annual professional performance reviews and professional development plans, right? So it's professional PD, right? Relating to the provision of students to students with a disability. Okay. Does every single member of the staff get professional development for students with disabilities annually?
Yes, and I say yes because if I'm a special education teacher and I'm in an iReady training, they're gonna go over the portion that pertains to students with disabilities
Okay.
in that part of it. On staff development days, we do have different options for people to participate in. And that lens is always there, especially with the special ed teachers. But is it like this is for students with disabilities? No.
Okay, so that would be the clarification. That helps me understand because I know Dr. Feeney sets agenda sometimes for the district-wide professional development.
Right.
And never do I see like
Right.
for
For-
specific
right.
special ed professional development.
Right.
But I've never thought of it that way, that sometimes that PD will have maybe like a sidebar of what the special ed part of it
And
is.
sometimes what he'll do too is we'll break it apart where this particular section is for elementary resource room teachers. So
Okay.
again, it's the same as everybody else, but specific to what they're doing.
Okay, so then I love that
Okay.
sentence.
All right.
Asterisk, asterisk, and specific to special ed more, so, okay.
Okay, first read for December or January. And with that, I'm going to,
I have one thing.
yes.
One of my notes that I forgot to ask about, from the assessments 1.7, do we want in the title to refer to testing accommodations?
Let me go back and find it.
Because that's really what this is about.
District-wide state assessments of students. Do you wanna make the title district and statewide accommodations?
No, so should it say testing accommodations or provision of testing modifications? Testing accommodations for district-wide and statewide assessments.
Oh, I found the diverse abilities.
What number, which one is it?
Sorry.
It's not in pre-referral.
It's in the one we're just talking about. But
Personnel?
anyhow,
7?
yes.
Okay, wait,
Page-
let's,
So the reason I got there was because we then go to talk about universal design, so that's not entirely.
Oh, just an
It's mostly
assessment.
about testing accommodations, but then it also refers to the universal design principles, so.
But isn't that still about testing accommodations in a certain sense?
In a certain sense, yes. So we could say, you know, the use of or provision of test accommodations on district-wide. I don't think that changes the purpose of the policy.
so can we just say testing accommodations for district-wide and statewide assessments of students with a disability?
I think it's clearer.
Okay,
Sorry to be late to the party as usual.
that's okay. And then the other comment?
And where did you find
Diverse
that?
abilities, well, the page two,
It's in
number
universal
one.
design.
Under universal design,
Oh.
one, made more usable by students with diverse abilities.
I like that language.
You don't or you do?
I do.
Okay, good, let's,
No, I'm wondering, obviously not for this moment, but
For future other places?
in this series, is that more of a sentiment
Mm-hmm.
that we would be going for?
I leave that, I don't know if students with a disability is a legal term of art, and so I'm going to,
Yes, so student with a disability is a legal term of art, and that diverse abilities is being used in a very specific way.
Because of the
Here.
universal design.
Right. And that could mean
Okay.
you might have students who are visually impaired, blind,
Right.
hearing impaired,
Right.
who don't necessarily need an IEP, but still need accommodations in order to appropriately access their education and
Right.
testing.
Right.
So that's the difference there.
Or else reasons.
So could we incorporate that language in other places? Probably, but it's gonna be very dependent on
Okay.
the particular section that we're looking at. It would have to be a case-by-case basis.
Okay, and are we required, I have a feeling, I think I know the answer, but I'm just gonna ask it. Special education is a term that I know New York State is still using, even though it rates against me.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have to stick with that, correct?
I would, yes.
Okay.
write a letter. Let them know what you think.
Add it to the list.
Not going through the list.
Petition.
Internally, district-wide, you want to use a different term, by all means, but on legal documents such as your policies or anything that's going out to the community, you gotta be consistent, sorry.
We're not doing the last three.
We're not doing the last three because our acting superintendent now has to bifurcate himself. Yes, so, our next meeting, but for the fact that we started 15 minutes late, I think we would have gotten through. the
Well, I have no
majority of
questions on
this.
those last three, if it helps anyone.
Okay, well then, make sure you have no questions the next time they come up. Our next meeting will be after the new year. Wish everybody a happy holiday, whatever you celebrate, a very safe new year. We will see you, and a great vacation for the kids. We will see you here on January 17th.